Good morning, Brother Chad Long again. I hope you guys aren't getting tired of me. And I really hope that you realize that I'm doing all of these things for the benefit of those who may hear. And it really makes me wonder why I didn't do this sooner. Virus or no virus, people need to be uplifted. People need to know that they're cared about, and the best person for that is Jesus Christ. And sometimes, living in this so busy world, we forget to consider that. I want you to notice. Well, think about this. Is there ever somebody that's just on your mind and heart? Somebody you care so much about that you think of them, and you think of them maybe multiple times a day, or maybe on specific days that are randomly. I have people in my family that I think about, and certain things bring it about. Certain things remind me of them. And well, I'll give you an example before we get into this morning's study in Philippians. I guess the closest person to me and my family was my Granny Bates. I mentioned her last week, and that this table was hers. But, and this table does remind me of her, but it's so much more than this table. My Granny Bates, if I could go back, I would have spent so much more time with her. I would have shown her more respect, more love. I would have let her know what she really means to me. I know she knew, and I know that she loved me, and I loved her. But it wasn't just Granny. My granddaddy too, and certain other members of my family. But Granny was really the mortar that held it all together. And so I have fond memories of her, and I think of her. And because she's not here anymore, sometimes when I think of her, I'll contact someone else in the family that was close to her like I was. For instance, my Uncle Mark or my sister Lisa, they were both close to my granny as well. So just as an example, when you have tender feelings for someone and you go to thinking of them, you'll sometimes reach out to those who knew them, had feelings for them as well. So I guess the point I'm making is hopefully we all have somebody that we have those tender feelings for, people that we care deeply about, people we want to reach out to. I mentioned yesterday letters and how excited you get when you would get a letter. I don't know. I can't speak for everybody. I know there's going to be somebody out there watching who says, well, not me. That was never my thing. I get that, but there's different references affect different people. I just know as a kid, letters were interesting because they come and they're like a surprise. It's like a gift when it's not Christmas, So you get a letter and you can't wait to open it and see what's in it. The people of Philippi got this letter, and we read the first 6 verses yesterday, and we ended on verse 6, so I'll pick up there and I'll reread it. It says, being confident of this very thing, that he which hath begun a good work in you will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. The people of Philippi had gotten this letter, and the first thing they noticed is that it's from the Apostle Paul, and he's wishing them peace and grace, and he's telling them he loves them, he prays for them, and he's promising them God, who began something in you, is going to complete it. He's not going to start something and not finish it. So it was a comfort to them. But these people were important to Paul, like my Granny Bates was to me, but so much more than that, because not only did he have a direct hand in starting the church, I believe he was closer to this church than any other one, with the possible exception of Ephesus. Now, I can't prove that. It's just based on study, but he had a tender place in his heart for the church at Philippi. So starting in verse 7, he says, even as it is meet for me to think this of you. Meet is an old English word that just means that it's right. It makes sense. He said, it's meet for me. It's right for me. It makes sense for me to think this of you because I have you in my heart. Inasmuch as both in my bonds and in the defense and confirmation of the gospel, you're all partakers of my grace. I want to focus just for a second or two on this word heart. I had an atheist one time. I was trying to witness to him. And maybe maybe it's my fault. Maybe sometimes I reach too high, but it's just I know the power of God, and I'm not problem conscious. I'm power conscious. I know what He can do. So I'll approach anybody with the gospel. I don't care who they are. I had an atheist one time, and I was telling him, in your heart, you have to know that there's a God. And he made this statement that I never forgot. He said, my heart beats and pumps blood. Which was his way of saying that the way we react, the way we talk about what's in our heart, in his mind, scientifically has no basis, because the heart is a muscle that pumps blood, or an organ, or whatever it is. I don't know. I'm not a biologist, but it's an organ. I think it's a muscle. It contracts. But anyway, so in what he was trying to say was that he didn't have an inner soul, heart, whatever you want to call this inside that we feel. I wish I knew then what I know now, because I know now what Paul's talking about when he says, I have you in my heart. Another word, and he's going to cover it in a minute if we get there. Another word for that is in verse 8 in the bowels. I think we all understand that most everything begins from inside, somewhere in here, or from somewhere outside of the brain. The brain is like a big telephone. Y'all know that, right? It sends and receives signals. It's like a big telephone, and it's, or a computer or something. And it's great, but things don't originate there. Just like I have a computer here that I'm using to record with. The things that I'm using the computer for don't originate in the computer. They have to be downloaded or uploaded or keyed in or moused upon or whatever. The computer does its job, but it doesn't originate these things. It didn't create itself, and it doesn't originate these things. When I drive, I don't drive with my brain. I drive with my feet and my hands. And there's steadily signals running back and forth. If I touch a hot stove, a signal inside runs a message to my brain. Says, woo, that's hot. You better let that go. Most things originate either in our extremities or inside of us. And I know that all my deep personal feelings are within. Whether you want to call that a heart, a soul, a conscience, whatever you want to call it, it's within here. That's why when you feel certain things, they're deep down in your gut. And that whole butterfly scenario. And I didn't mean to get long-winded on that. But when Paul says, I have you in my heart, just understand, this is not a mind thing. It didn't originate in his brain. It originated from somewhere down deep. He cared about these people. He cared about them enough to sit down and write a letter and tell them he cared about them. When's the last time somebody cared enough about you to sit down and write you a letter and say, hey, I care about you? Well, I can tell you, I haven't written you a letter, but I care about you. And I care about you not because I'm any better than anybody else, but because I have Jesus Christ in my heart. He cares about me, and because he cares about me, I care about you. I don't care who you are watching this. You just believe this. Chad Long loves you. I don't have to know who you are precisely. I love you, and if you're a believer, I'm going to spend eternity with you. So I better get to loving you well here if I'm going to spend all eternity with you. Well, Paul loved these people in Philippi, and he loved you too. This letter's written to you too. I don't want you to forget that. Just because he wrote it to the believers at Philippi, he didn't know you yet. But God knew that this letter would be circulated 2,000 years later, and it includes all believers to that extent. It says, I have you in my heart, and as much as both in my bonds, remember, bonds, he's in jail at the moment. And in the defense and confirmation of the gospel, ye all are partakers of my grace. He's saying we're all in this together, locked up or not locked up. I love you. You mean something to me. We're all in this together. Let me just share this with you. As we go through this Wuhan flu, coronavirus, Chinese virus, whatever you want to call it, we're all in this together. I don't get to exclude myself from this situation just because I view it differently. We're all in this together. We're all going to have to deal with these things together. Some people in different ways, some people to more extreme than others. But we're all going through this together. And in a similar fashion, as believers, we're living through this world and its wickedness together. We're all looking for that coming of Jesus Christ. It was mentioned in verse 6. It's going to be mentioned again here in verse 10. But anyway, looking back at the text, he says, "You're all partakers of my grace." Then we move into verse 8. He says, "For God is my record, how greatly I long after you all in the bowels of Jesus Christ." This word bowels is another word for down deep. It doesn't sound pretty because of what we've turned it into in this modern day. But when Paul wrote that, he was talking about that deep inner place. And he's saying something I said a moment ago. I love you because Jesus loves me, and I have the love of Jesus in me. 1 John 4:7-8 says, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God. And everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. He that loveth not God, for God is love." It's one of those things I learned at church camp years ago, and I've never forgotten it. God is love. So anything we do in true love is an extension of Him. So what he says in verse 8 is, "God is my record, how greatly I long after you." You could also say how much I love you. In the bowels of Jesus Christ, where love originates. That's what that means. Verse 9, he says, "This I pray, that your love may abound, yet more and more in knowledge and in all judgment." See, it begins in here. It does. Because Christ lives in here. But it abounds based on understanding and knowledge. Remember, it runs through the telephone, runs through the computer. There's signals there. But it originates here with Christ. And Christ will expound on it, and it will abound. It will grow. That's what that means, is to grow. Anyway, it'll grow in knowledge and in judgment. Verse 10 says that you may approve things that are excellent, that you may be sincere and without offense till the day of Christ. I really want to dive into this verse, and we're going to run out of time. I was trying to get to verse 12 or 13, and I'm just not going to get there. There's just not if I'm going to keep these as brief as I'd like to keep them. I'll read verse 11, but I'm going to go back to 10 and close. It says, "Being filled with the fruits of righteousness, which are by Jesus Christ unto the glory and praise of God." The fruits of righteousness is another phrase for fruits of the Spirit, which you find in Galatians 5:22 and 23. We'll look at those maybe tomorrow. But going back to verse 10, it says that you may approve things that are excellent. Approve here means to try them or to see how they may differ. You can't approve something until you've looked it over. I mean, that's just the way it is. When a car gets made in a factory, they don't just send it out. It has to be approved. They have to look it over. They got to test it. They got to try it, especially a new design. It's not been approved. It's not been tried. They do the same thing with the FDA. You guys know this, especially in this current crisis, that when they do find a vaccine, it's going to have to be tested, tried, and approved. So that you may approve things means you need to try them and to test them and to see that these things are excellent. He says, approve things that are excellent. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I wish auto companies would do that. There'd be far less recalls if they'd approve things that are excellent instead of approving things that are okay. Because when you don't approve things that are excellent, they wind up coming back and you have to do a bunch of recalls. Same thing with drugs. I wish that they would only approve excellent drugs, things that will help us, instead of giving us a list of side effects that make us worse than we were when we started. So with Christ we can do that. We can approve things that are excellent, and we may be sincere and without offense until the day of Christ. I'll hit on these quickly. Sincere is an interesting word, and because I took Spanish and I took it for many years, I actually have some understanding of words that are based on Latin languages. Sin in Spanish means without. Okay? Con means with, and sin means without. Sincere comes from a Latin word that means sincerus. It means without wax. There's a whole story behind that, but basically the Romans would cover up errors and mistakes with wax and try to hide bad spots in things, especially art. Well, when things would get hot, wax would melt and run out. People would see that they got something that was fraudulent. So we get our word sincere from a word that means without wax. It means that it's the genuine article. It's not. It hasn't been covered up with, filled in with wax or made into a fake. So basically, when we read that word sincere, we know what it means, but I thought I'd give you a little history on where it came from. We approve things that are excellent and be sincere and genuine in the doing of it, without offense till the day of Christ. I'm going to close on that because we're about out of time, but without offense doesn't mean you're not going to offend anybody. Nobody's going to not offend somebody. Jesus offended all of Jerusalem. There's a difference between offending people and being the cause for the offense. So please understand, that word really means blameless. You're going to offend somebody. If you love Jesus, you're going to... Look, I offend people, and I never try to. It's not my intent. If I do it, it's completely by accident. But people looking at my life and looking at what I'm trying to do. For instance, this video may offend somebody because I'm talking about the Savior. But I'll be held blameless before God because it's not my intent to offend anyone, and I'm not doing anything that's ugly. I'm trying to do something good and positive and wonderful. So when it says without offense, that means don't be the cause. Don't be the blame. If you're speaking the truth and you're speaking it in love, they can hate you all they want to. Remember, it's not personal. I say this all the time, but it's important to remember. It's not personal. They don't hate us. They hate Jesus. They just take it out on us because they don't see him, because he's inside of us. And they know that. That's why they're taking it out on us. They know Christ is inside of us, and it's him they hate. It's not personal. And if we would stop taking the things that people do to us personally, we could live much richer, fuller lives. If people want to hate Jesus, that's their right. They want to take it out on me. I got broad shoulders. I don't care. I used to, but I don't anymore. So anyway, I've gone way long. I want you to understand that this letter was intended for us, that Paul wrote it in love because he loved everybody who loved Jesus. He loved them by the power of Jesus. And he's giving us some instruction here, but he's also showing us how much he loves us. And he wants us to be able to approve things that are excellent, to be sincere and without offense until the day of Christ. We finished on that yesterday. We're going to finish on that again. Remember, being confident of this very thing, he hath begun a good work. He that which hath begun a good work in you will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. And being filled with the fruits of righteousness which are by Jesus Christ, we may approve things that are excellent, that you may be sincere and without offense until the day of Christ. So where we finished yesterday and where we finished today, both looking for that day of Christ. The day of Christ is the rapture, and we're supposed to be doing these things until such time as he comes to get us. So for us believers, let's keep our eyes on Jesus and be looking forward to that day when he comes. If you're not a believer, oh how I wish you would become one. It's real easy. You just speak to God. Pray to the Lord Jesus Christ. Ask him to save you. And I promise you, if you mean it, he will. I love you. We'll see you tomorrow, Lord willing.